Hi there, my name is Journey Jonas. I'm a student at South Dakota State University, enrolled in the Histories and Systems of Psychology. And today I'll be presenting to you about an important historical figure named Cesare Lombroso, who often also known as the father of modern criminology. So to start off, who was Cesare Lombroso? So Lombroso was an Italian physician, psychiatrist, and criminologist who became one of the most influential figures in the history of criminology. During the 19th century, crime was often explained as the result of poor morals, bad character, or personal choice. Lombroso believed there was another way to study crime. Instead of relying only on those explanations, he argued that criminal behavior should be examined scientifically through observation, measurement, and research. This approach led him to become one of the founders of criminal anthropology, which focuses on the scientific study of criminals and criminal behavior. So rather than simply asking why people commit crimes, Lombroso wanted to collect evidence, identify patterns, and better understand what might contribute to this criminal behavior. He is most widely known for introducing his theory of the born criminal. Lombroso believed that some people were biologically predisposed to criminal behavior and that certain physical and behavioral characteristics could help identify them. Although modern research has rejected many of these conclusions, his efforts to study crime scientifically changed the direction of criminology and influenced later research in both criminology and psychology. So, before looking at his theories in more detail, it's important to first understand how his life and career shaped the ideas he would later be known for. So, now that we have a general understanding of who Cesare Lombroso was, let's take a closer look at his early life and education. He was born on November 6 in 1835 in Verona, Italy. He was the son of Arone Lombroso and Zephora Levi, who both came from well-established Jewish families in northern Italy. His father's family traced its roots to the Venetian Jewish community, while his mother's family was successful in banking and manufacturing in the Piedmont region. Lombroso grew up during a period of major political and societal change. During the 19th century, many of the restrictions that had previously affected Jewish communities were beginning to disappear, creating more opportunities for education and professional careers. Though we can't really say this directly shaped his theories, it was definitely the environment in which he was raised and educated. And on that note, education became an important part of Lombroso's life from an early age. He wasn't completely satisfied with the traditional school system, so he continued his education with a private tutor. His interest in learning eventually led him to pursue medicine. In 1852, he enrolled at the University of Pavia Medical School, and he later expanded his education by studying at the universities of Padua and Vienna, where he was introduced to different medical and scientific ideas. He earned his medical degree from the University of Pavia in 1858 and continued studying psychiatry, hygiene, anthropology, criminology, and forensic medicine. Those areas of study would eventually provide the foundation for the research he became known for later on in his career. And so, after completing his education, Lombroso began building a career that combined medicine, teaching, and research. One of his earliest professional experiences was serving as a physician in the newly formed Italian army. This gave him valuable medical experience and allowed him to work with people from many different regions of Italy. During this time, he also witnessed the political changes taking place as Italy moved towards unification. In 1863, he began teaching psychiatry, nervous pathology, and anthropology at the University of Pavia. Teaching allowed him to continue expanding his own knowledge while educating future medical professionals. And so from 1871 to 1873, he served as the director of the asylum in Pizarro, working with patients experienced in different realms of psychology. There was a variety of mental health conditions that gave him the opportunity to closely observe human behavior and continue developing his medical expertise. After leaving Pizarro, Lombroso accepted a position at the University of Turin, where he became a professor of forensic medicine. By this point in his career, he had gained experience as a physician, educator, and researcher. These experiences helped shape his medical and academic career while preparing him for the research that would later define his work in criminology. And it is also important to note that while Lombroso was building his professional career, he also had a family life. So in 1870, he married Nina di Bendetti after being introduced to her by David Levi, who was both a relative on his mother's side and an important mentor throughout his life. Levi played a significant role in his education and remained an important influence on both his personal and professional development. Lombroso and Nina had 5 children together. One of their daughters, Gina, later became a physician and writer. She wrote a biography about her father that is still considered one of the most valuable sources of information about his life and career. Throughout his later years, Lombroso remained active in teaching, writing, and participating in academic life. He continued to develop and publish his ideas while becoming one of Italy's most recognized intellectuals. Lombroso died on October 19, 1909 in Turin, Italy at the age of 73. Although his life had come to an end, the work he spent decades developing would continue to influence criminology and spark debate for generations. So now that we've looked at his life from birth to death, we will turn our attention to the ideas and research that made him one of the most influential and controversial figures in the history of criminology. So before Lombroso, crime was commonly explained as the result of poor morals, bad character, or a person's decision to break the law. While those ideas were widely accepted at the time, Lombroso believed that there was another way to study criminal behavior. Instead of relying only on moral or religious explanations, he argued that crime should be examined through scientific observation and evidence. So to better understand why people committed crimes, Lombroso examined prisoners, asylum patients, and other groups that had received very little scientific attention during that time. Instead of relying on assumptions, he carefully observed individuals' collected measurements and looked for patterns that might explain criminal behavior. He believed this evidence could provide a stronger understanding of crime than traditional moral or religious explanations alone. This way of thinking was very different from what most people believed during the 19th century. Rather than accepting traditional explanations, Lombroso encouraged researchers to investigate crime using the same kinds of methods that were already being used in medicine and other sciences. Though many of his conclusions would later be challenged, this shift towards observation and scientific investigation became one of his most important contributions. And it also laid the foundation for the next major development in his work, which was his creation of criminal anthropology. So, criminal anthropology became one of the first attempts to study crime through scientific methods. Instead of relying on traditional explanations, Lombroso believed researchers should study criminals directly to better understand why criminal behavior occurs. So to do this, he examined prisoners and asylum patients and other individuals involved in criminal activity, as mentioned before. Rather than focusing on opinions or assumptions, he carefully observed physical characteristics, recorded behaviors, and compared offenders with people who had not committed crimes. His goal then was to identify patterns that might help explain this criminal behavior. He also gathered information from many different sources. He used observations made by physicians, judges, police officials, prison staff, and others who regularly worked with offenders. By bringing together information from multiple perspectives, he believed he could build a more complete understanding of crime. Another important part of criminal anthropology was classification. Lombroso believed that not all offenders were the same, so he tried to organize criminals into different categories based on shared characteristics. His goal was to study crime systematically, much like scientists study diseases or other areas of medicine. Though many of his conclusions were later challenged, criminal anthropology represented an important shift towards observation, data collection, and scientific investigation. The ideas developed through his research eventually led him to introduce his most famous theory, which is known as the born criminal theory. Through years of observing prisoners and other offenders, Lombroso became convinced that not every person committed crimes for the same reasons. He believed that some individuals were actually born with biological traits that made them more likely to engage in criminal behavior. According to Lombroso, these criminal tendencies could be inherited and passed from one generation to the next, a concept he referred to as criminal heredity. So rather than believing crime was always the result of personal choice or a person's environment, he argued that biology also played an important role. He first presented these ideas in his 1876 book, L'Homme Delinquent, or The Criminal Man. In this publication, he introduced the born criminal theory and explained his belief that some individuals were biologically predisposed to criminal behavior. The book became the foundation for much of his later research and remains one of the most influential published works. Lombroso also believed that people he classified as born criminals shared certain physical and behavioral characteristics that set them apart from the general population. He claimed that these individuals often lacked remorse, empathy, self-control, and believed that these traits reflected underlying biological differences. Today, the born criminal theory is considered one of the most controversial ideas in criminology. Modern research has rejected Lombroso's belief that inherited physical characteristics alone can explain criminal behavior. So even so, the theory remains historically important because it encouraged researchers to continue exploring scientific explanations for crime, even though those explanations have changed considerably over time. One question still remained: if some people were truly born criminals, what evidence supported that belief? So this question led him to one of the most famous moments of his career, which we will take a look at next. An important detail that is often overlooked is that Lombroso did not believe every person who committed a crime was a born criminal. Instead, he believed there were different types of offenders, and he tried to classify them based on what he observed during his research. According to Lombroso, the born criminal represented only one category of an offender. He believed these individuals were the most dangerous because he thought their criminal tendencies were inherited rather than shaped by their surroundings. He also identified other categories, including what he called occasional criminals. Unlike born criminals, he believed these individuals committed crimes because of circumstances or situations rather than inherited biological traits. This distinction showed that Lombroso recognized crime could have different causes, even though he placed a strong emphasis on biology. So for Lombroso, classification was an important part of studying crime scientifically, Instead of assuming every offender was the same, he believed researchers should carefully observe individuals, identify shared characteristics, and organize criminals into different categories. He believed this systematic approach would help create a more scientific understanding of criminal behavior and improve the study of criminology. Though modern criminology no longer accepts these classifications, his attempts to organize offenders into different categories reflected his broader goal of studying crime through observation, evidence, and scientific investigation. This work also laid the foundation down for the evidence he believed supported his theories, which we will look at next. So, as he continued his research, he believed he had finally found evidence that supported this born criminal theory. So, one of the most well-known moments of his career occurred when he examined the skull of a convicted criminal named Giuseppe Villela. Lombroso believed this discovery helped explain why some individuals were born with criminal tendencies. So while studying this skull, Lombroso noticed what he believed was an unusual anatomical feature called the median occipital fossa. This observation led him to develop the idea of atavism, which suggests that some criminals were evolutionary throwbacks who had inherited characteristics from earlier stages of human evolution. So, in Lombroso's view, these inherited traits helped explain why some individuals were more likely to commit crimes. He believed these individuals had not fully evolved in the same way as the rest of society. So, according to his theory, these inherited biological differences made some people naturally more likely to engage in criminal behavior. He viewed the skull of Giuseppe as one of the strongest pieces of evidence supporting his belief and used it to reinforce many of the ideas found in his born criminal theory. Today, however, scientists do not accept Lombroso's interpretation. Modern research has shown that physical features such as skull shape cannot be used to determine whether someone is likely to become a criminal. Even though his conclusions were later rejected, the skull remains an important part of criminology's history because it represents the moment Lombroso believed he had found scientific evidence for his theory. And over time, researchers began testing his ideas using new scientific methods. Though they eventually rejected, once again, many of his conclusions, they did not ignore the question he raised about criminal behavior. Instead, they continued building on his interest in scientific research, which is why Lombroso's work is still discussed today. So next, we will look at how modern scholars evaluate both his contributions and his mistakes. So how do modern researchers view his work today? Like I've said several times, much of Lombroso's conclusions have been rejected. Modern scholars have not, though, dismissed his work entirely. Instead, many recognize that he helped move criminology toward a more scientific way of studying crime. Rather than remembering him only for the theories that were later proven incorrect, researchers also recognize the influence he had on the development of criminology as a field. One scholar who helped reshape the way people think about Lombroso was named Nicole Rafter. Instead of focusing only on whether his theories were right or wrong, she encouraged researchers to examine how Lombroso conducted his research. Rafter argued that Lombroso should also be remembered as one of the founders of visual criminology because photographs, anatomical drawings, preserved specimens, and other visual materials played an important role in the way he collected and presented evidence. Throughout his career, Lombroso collected a wide variety of materials that he believed would improve the understanding of criminal behavior. His museum contains skulls, preserved brains, photographs, wax models, prisoner artwork, tattoos, weapons, and many other artifacts. Today, these collections are not viewed as proof that his theories were correct. Instead, they more provide historians and researchers with insight into how criminology developed during the late 19th century. And because of this, Lombroso continues to be studied today, not because modern researchers, again, accept all or most of his conclusions, but because understanding his work helps explain how scientific thinking about crime has evolved and changed over time. So, with all of that being said, some of the questions Lombroso asked continue to influence criminological research today. Modern researchers no longer believe that criminals can be identified by their physical appearance or that crime is caused by inherited physical traits alone. However, they still study whether biology can play a role in criminal behavior. This has led to the development of modern biosocial criminology. Unlike Lombroso's approach, modern researchers recognize that criminal behavior cannot be explained by biology alone. Instead, they examine how biological factors and environmental experiences work together throughout a person's life. Researchers now study areas like genetics, neuroscience, hormones, nutrition, and brain development, while also considering the influence of childhood experiences, family relationships, education, and all sorts of other social factors. Rather than searching for a single cause of crime, they recognize that many different factors interact to influence human behavior. Looking back, Lombroso's specific conclusions about criminal behavior have not stood the test of time. But however, his belief that crime should be studied through observation, research, and scientific investigation helped shape the direction of criminology. His work encouraged future researchers to continue asking questions, testing ideas, and improving our understanding of criminal behavior. So, in the end, Lombroso's greatest legacy is not that all of his theories were correct, but that he helped transform the study of crime into a field that continues to grow through scientific research and evidence. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed learning about Lombroso just as much as I did. I do encourage you to ask questions of your own, like he did, and test these questions with confidence, as you never really know what change you could be a part of in our future.